Neuropsychology of Expert Hyper-Vigilance Part 1 Number 1639, May 13, 2026, Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation, Category, Neuropsychology. Special note, this research journal is based on my personal research using data from my own body and is provided for educational purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice and should not be interpreted as guidance from medical professionals. Abstract, in this paper, I describe a neuropsychological phenomenon that emerged after my hemorrhagic stroke on June 21, 2025, an expert-level hypervigilant cognitive state shaped by trauma, continuous biomedical self-monitoring, and systems engineering interpretation, over 17 years of high-frequency glucose, blood pressure, and physiological tracking, combined with my background in mathematics, engineering, artificial intelligence, psychology, and pathophysiology, my brain gradually transformed routine biomarkers into survival-linked signals. What might appear as anxiety is, in my case, an adaptive form of neuroplasty reorganization involving condition-threat association, interoceptive amplification, repeated attention reinforcement, and mechanistic predictive modeling. I now perceive physiological variables in the same way a structural engineer perceives load, fatigue, and progressive structural collapse. This heightened survival awareness may have contributed to my unusual post-stroke productivity of 300 research papers within 300 days by pushing my cognition into a highly activated state that increased efficacy, pattern recognition, and creative output. I propose that prolonged exposure to physiological danger, combined with continuous self-observation and expert mechanistic understanding, can produce a distinct neuropsychological profile in which vigilance enhances both early warning capability and intellectual performance. This self-study offers a framework for understanding how trauma, neuroplasticity, and systems thinking can interact to reshape cognition in later life. Preface. During my high-tech semiconductor career in Silicon Valley, I went through an 8-year-long legal battle involving nearly $500 million. The prolonged stress placed enormous pressure on both my mental and physical health. During those difficult years, I suffered 5 heart attacks. Although I continued working and never experienced a complete emotional collapse, the cumulative stress came dangerously close to destroying my health. Eventually, the legal matters were resolved, and I was proven innocent. However, the long-term physical and emotional damage had already occurred. Those experiences forced me to rethink the direction and meaning of my life. Therefore, at age 55 in 2002, I made a major life decision. I sold my high-tech business, left Silicon Valley, and returned to Asia. There, I devoted much of my time to charitable and humanitarian work, including helping 250 abused women and abandoned children. At the same time, I began a completely different intellectual journey, coming from backgrounds in math, physics, engineering, artificial intelligence, and business management. I gradually became interested in human psychology, emotional behavior, personality disorders, and how individuals perceive and respond to stress, conflict, and suffering. Over the next 9 years, I self-studied psychology extensively and read approximately 300 psychology books and papers. My goal was not to judge people, but rather to better understand the complexity of human behavior and the psychological factors that can influence decision-making, emotional reactions, and interpersonal conflicts. That period marked my transition from the structure world of science and engineering into the far more complicated world of human psychology and human suffering. It also broadened my understanding of how differently people may perceive the same reality based on their personal experiences, emotional health states, and internal struggles. However, after those 9 years of psychology study and charitable work, another major life crisis emerged. I was diagnosed with kidney failure and severe neuropathy that nearly led to the amputation of several toes. That diagnosis became a second major wake-up call, this time involving my own physical survival. As a result, I stopped my charitable work and self-study of psychology, returned to America, and began to self-study physical health, medicine, pathophysiology, chronic disease, metabolism, and biomedical systems. That decision eventually led to my current 17-year journey in medical research, resulting in nearly 1,640 written medical research papers, including around 200 psychology research papers. This background serves as the foundation for the following neuropsychological discussion. Near waking up early this morning, I had a vivid dream that I was a skyscraper engineer. Although I was highly trained and fully understood the engineering structure, I still feared the height itself, psychologically. This dream may reflect the neuropsychological burden carried by experts who deeply understand dangerous systems. A structural engineer understands load, fatigue, hidden weakness, and progressive structural collapse far more vividly than ordinary people. The engineer knows exactly which bolt is under the most tension. Similarly, after my stroke on June 21, 2025 and 17 years of intensive lifestyle and physiological monitoring, glucose and blood pressure are no longer abstract numbers to me. They represent vascular calcification, loading, stress, cumulative fatigue, amplification, and potential instability within a living biomedical system. The dream may therefore symbolize the coexistence of professional competence and heightened danger awareness. Introduction. During the past 4 days, my stroke triggering sensitivity index (TSI) stroke values shifted from the 70s into the low 90s, according to my own framework. Values below 99 generally should not create major concern. However, my reaction to these changes revealed something psychologically important. I currently measure my glucose approximately 96 times per day while manually entering the data. I also manually record my blood pressure approximately 20 to 24 times daily. Over time, this extremely high-frequency monitoring has created an unusually heightened state of physiological observation. ND data sensitivity. I understand very clearly how sensitive the TSI proxy can become in response to even relatively small changes in glucose levels, blood pressure, pulse pressure, or sleep condition. Early this morning, I even had a dream in which I was a skyscraper builder who feared heights. The dream reminded me of firefighters who may deeply fear fires precisely because they understand the danger mechanism better than ordinary people. This experience raised an important neuropsychological question. Can expert-level knowledge combined with prolonged pathophysiological monitoring create a heightened hypervigilant cognitive state? I believe the answer is yes. Hypervigilance and survival learning from a neuropsychological viewpoint. What I am experiencing is not simply ordinary anxiety. Instead, it appears to represent a combination of several interacting mechanisms: post-traumatic hypervigilance, repeated attention reinforcement, conditioned threat association, interoceptive amplification, and mechanistic predictive awareness. After surviving severe medical events, especially a hemorrhagic stroke near the pontine location with a high mortality rate, the brain naturally becomes more sensitive to warning signals associated with survival. In trauma psychology, this phenomenon is known as hypervigilance. Hypervigilance means continuous scanning for potential danger. After a major stroke event, the brain learns that small physiological changes may carry significant consequences. Therefore, biomarkers such as blood pressure, glucose variation, pulse pressure, sleep disruption, and TSI proxy movement gradually become emotionally meaningful signals rather than some academic or neutral numerical values. The nervous system begins treating those variables almost like a radar system for survival monitoring, or a military radar system detecting incoming missiles. Importantly, this process is not irrational. It is actually adaptive learning following severe danger exposure. Classical conditioning and trauma memory work of Ivan Pavlov helps explain part of this phenomenon. In classical conditioning, previously neutral signals become emotionally charged after association with danger or pain. Before my stroke, moderate fluctuations in blood pressure or glucose were simply data values. After my stroke, similar fluctuations became psychologically associated with vascular rupture risk and mortality. As a result, even relatively small physiological shifts can automatically trigger heightened emotional attention. This mechanism resembles soldiers reacting strongly to sudden loud sounds, drivers becoming tense after previous car accidents, or firefighters responding intensely to the smell of smoke. The brain gradually builds conditioned associations between biomarkers and survival threat. Operant conditioning and repetitive monitoring work of B.F. Skinner also provides useful insight. Repeated measurement itself can reinforce a behavioral feedback loop from measurement greater than interpretation greater than temporary reassurance. Repeat measurement. Each measurement slightly reduces uncertainty, which psychologically rewards the monitoring behavior. Over time, the measurement frequency gradually increases because the brain learns that observation temporarily reduces fear. This mechanism is common among traders, engineers, pilots, elite athletes, medical professionals, and patients recovering from severe illness. In my own case, measuring glucose 96 times daily and blood pressure more than 20 times daily creates an extremely dense observation feedback cycle. Over time, repeated monitoring increases neural sensitivity, cognitive amplification, and salience. Modern neuroscience suggests that repeated attention strengthens salience. In simple terms, the more attention the brain repeatedly allocates toward a signal, the more emotionally important that signal becomes. Therefore, continuous physiological monitoring can progressively lower the threshold for perceived danger detection. The brain gradually says, this variable is extremely important for survival. As a result, small BP changes feel larger, trend direction becomes emotionally meaningful, transient spikes become psychologically magnified, and minor fluctuations gain predictive importance. This process is especially important after trauma because emotionally charged memories become highly retrievable. The work of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky on cognitive heuristics also helps explain this phenomenon. After a life-threatening stroke, catastrophic outcomes become easier to mentally imagine. Therefore, the brain estimates future risk as more immediate and more vivid. This is known as the availability heuristic. The easier the brain can imagine catastrophe, the more psychologically probable it feels. Interoception and expert awareness. Another important concept is interoception, which refers to the brain's awareness of internal bodily states. Most individuals possess relatively low interoceptive awareness, however. Prolonged self-monitoring can dramatically increase sensitivity to glucose shifts, pulse pressure variation, vascular tension, sleep changes, and autonomic activation. Elite athletes or musicians often develop similar body sensitivity through years of training. However, after trauma or severe illness, heightened interoception can become linked with fear amplification. In reality, this fear amplification may actually improve the probability of survival. From a neuropsychological and evolutionary perspective, fear amplification after trauma or severe illness can function as a protective survival mechanism. The nervous system becomes more vigilant and more sensitive to internal bodily signals. Interoception, attempting to detect danger earlier and avoid future threats. My situation differs from ordinary health anxiety because it is strongly connected to mechanistic understanding. I do not merely see numbers, I see nonlinear amplification, cumulative vascular fatigue, trajectory direction, transient stress loading, and interaction between multiple physiological variables. This resembles the way a structural engineer no longer sees merely a tall building. Instead, the engineer sees load distribution, resonance, fatigue accumulation, weak structural joints, and possible progressive structural collapse. Similarly, a firefighter understands how rapidly a small fire may spread into catastrophe. Knowledge increases predictive awareness, but it also increases psychological burden. This is part 1.